I've tested the complete Ultracryl paint range, the Kickstarter sensation from Germany. Premium acrylic paint with maximum pigmentation and the finest raw materials money can buy. What could possibly go wrong? Well, this is without a doubt the most difficult review I've ever had to make. You'll find out why in this video. You hear a lot of good things about Ultracryl, but since the Kickstarter has been fulfilled, some more critical voices have started to emerge. To get to the bottom of it, I've prepared 3 segments for you. First, I'll give you an overview of what Ultracryl does differently from other hobby acrylics. Second, I'll put every paint type through its paces on test models. Priming, airbrushing, covering power, techniques like feathering and blending, and of course the fluorescent paints and metallics. And at the end you'll get my honest verdict on whether I would recommend Ultracryl or not. By the way, I'm Stahly from Tale of Painters. I've spent over 2 decades painting Warhammer and tabletop miniatures, and I made it my mission to review every new hobby paint range. I also maintain this library of professional, hand-painted color swatches for you to download, the Stahly swatch system. Please like and subscribe if that's what you need. Okay, Ultracryl was a pretty successful Kickstarter from 1001 Labs, which are 3 guys from Germany who spent over 4 years developing what they set out to make the perfect miniature paint. Ultra pigmentation, ultra saturation, ultra opacity, ultra matte, ultra flow. Everything ultra. The paints are now also available on their own website. Pricing for individual bottles is reasonable, €3.88 or €4.76 for 20 ml, depending on the pigment raw material costs, though metallics come in at just under €6. I'll explain later why they're more expensive. The bottles are longer and thinner than standard dropper bottles with very fine nozzles similar to TT Combat paints, which actually suits the fluid consistency well, though they can clog up sometimes. The labels list the exact pigments used, so perfect for pigment nerds. Opacity and light fastness is also indicated. Ultracryl uses the highest quality pigments you'd normally only find in expensive artist paints, in clean mixes without fillers. The palette is compact with only 72 colors, and they distinguish between the R series, which targets maximum covering power for hobbyists, and the monopigment M series, where each paint contains just one pigment and can be more transparent. Those are aimed at more advanced painters and are meant to be used similarly to artist paints. All of that sounds fantastic, extremely high quality on paper. In practice though, I ran into some difficulties. I also have a theory about why, and I explain all of it now on this Stormcast Eternal test model. First, I used the grey primer to prime the model through the airbrush. It doesn't really need thinning when spraying at around 25 to 30 psi with a 0.3 mm nozzle. Coverage is excellent and the result is ultra matte, though it does leave a slightly rough texture, which you can see on the chest armor. I went with the Astral Templars color scheme, using magenta transparent as the base color. As the name suggests, this is a more transparent paint, so I built it up in several thin coats through the airbrush, adding just a few drops of Ultracryl's airbrush medium. The pigment used has an ultra-high saturation and vibrancy for such a dark magenta. The camera can barely capture its depth. Next, I sprayed some shading with dioxazine Violet Transparent. Also a transparent color, but perfect for airbrushed shading. The result already looks very promising. It's incredible how these colors glow. The armor is now an extremely deep magenta tone with beautiful gradients, though the rough texture has become noticeably more pronounced with the additional paint layers. Ultracryl markets itself on ultra covering power. Let's see whether that holds up for brush painting too. I paint the shield with titanium white, straight from the bottle without thinning. Ultracryl paints are fluid, more like pre-thin airbrush paints, but still highly pigmented. It's a common misconception that thin paints are inherently less pigmented than thicker ones. Thicker paints often just contain more thickening agents or fillers, and if ultracryl feels too thin for you, you can mix in some of their thickening medium. As you can see, the covering power is very high, but an uneven texture built up, almost as if the pigments are clumping together. For anyone who backed the Kickstarter, is this happening to you too? Let me know in the comments. 1001 Labs are aware of the problem, and it particularly affects paints containing the yellow PIY 184 pigment. Bismuth yellow and lemon yellow are the worst offenders. After I gave this feedback, I received updated versions of those colors, but unfortunately the bismuth yellow is still extremely clumpy. I hope this gets fixed soon. If there's any news, I'll add it in the pinned comment below. Next, I want to shade the shield using the feathering technique. I thin titanium buff with water to a heavy glaze consistency and apply the glaze around the lightning bolts. Then I feather it out into the white with a clean, slightly damp brush. And as you can see, this doesn't work at all. The paint breaks apart in smears. I've never seen anything like it. I switched from water to Ultracryl's Ursuppe medium, which helps, but a smooth blend is still very difficult to pull off and a coffee staining effect remains. I have a theory about why this happens, which I'll get to in a moment. For the next step, I painted yellow ochre thinned with medium directly into the recesses around the ornament without feathering, which worked a bit better. In the end, I patched over the problem areas with thin titanium white, but I'm not happy with the result. Here's my theory about what's causing this. Beyond the high-quality pigments, Ultracryl has another distinctive feature: the binder. Instead of conventional acrylic resins, Ultracryl uses a hybrid of acrylic and polyurethane. Polyurethane is commonly used in airbrush primers and varnishes because of its stronger adhesion and durability. The problem is that acrylic and polyurethane don't play particularly well together chemically, and even though 1001 Labs promises the best of both worlds, my suspicion is that it's the binder medium causing the issues of Ultracryl. Perhaps the paints are also overpigmented because there's a limit of how much pigment a paint can actually take. But back to the Stormcast. I give the armor some panel lining by painting slightly thin dioxazine violet transparent directly into the recesses and around the rivets. That works well enough. The transparent colors do seem less affected by the smearing issue. Then I want to add some edge highlights. A thin consistency combined with high covering power is actually an ideal combination for edge highlighting. So I mix a little carmine red into the magenta transparent. The very rough texture from the airbrushed layers made the flow from brush to model less than ideal, but it was doable. The ultra high opacity combined with the ultra matte, slightly chalky finish does take some getting used to though. And anywhere I try to feather out the highlights slightly, we're back to the smearing problem. Most noticeable on the left hip plate. I had intended to paint the whole model, but at this point I just gave up. Off camera, I ran further tests because I simply couldn't believe the paint was giving me this much trouble. For one thing, I painted all the colors onto plastic card for my Stahly swatch system and had them professionally digitized. You'll find a color swatch for all Ultracryl colors on my Patreon for a small donation, along with swatches for many other hobby paint ranges. With these you can easily compare colors across different manufacturers, so you never have to buy the wrong color again. I also painted additional test models like this Stahly bust using Pyro Red as a starting point. Again, excellent covering power, but you really need to take care not ending up with a clumpy texture. I also noticed that the Ultracryl paints sometimes tend to leave bubbles on the models that don't pop on their own while drying. Feathering and shading produced a similar smearing as on the Stormcast shield. Wet blending worked somewhat better, as you can see on the chest plate here. And on this dagger sheath, where I blended Skin Tone 5 into Skin Tone 4. I have to mention that other paints like P3 still blend far more easily for me. While I'm not a Golden Demon winner, I'm genuinely not a bad painter. Here for comparison is another test model I painted for my Green Stuff World Max Formula review. But the model on the left is simply the best I can get out of Ultracryl. Next up, before I try the metallics, I want to test the fluorescent paints. I've heard very positive things about these from a well-known German creator colleague. I want to give the eye sockets a fluorescent glowing effect, so I start by base coating them with titanium white. Then I pick up the Fluo Red, but unfortunately in all of my Ultracryl fluo paints from the Kickstarter production run, the pigments had completely separated and clumped to the bottom after just a few weeks. Even a vortex mixer or stirring rod couldn't do much about it. All that comes out is lightly tinted medium. I try to do my best as the pigmentation is so strong that even the medium has quite a punch. But the consistency is so thin that I can't control the paint at all. It just runs straight into the eye sockets. It's a shame because the fluorescent paints have real potential, but in this state they're unusable. The issue has already been raised in the 1001 Labs Discord and a fix is being worked on. I'll update the pinned comment below as soon as I know more. So, this video was a difficult journey so far. Can the metallics salvage things? Let's find out. There are 8 metallics in total, and at just under €6 each, they're the most expensive paints in the Ultracryl lineup. That's because they use the highest quality metallic flakes currently available. Xenexo pigments from Schlenk, which are glass-coated aluminium pigments with extraordinary reflectivity and opacity. Let's see how they look on a model. So the Ultracryl metallics feel even thinner than the acrylics. They have an almost quicksilver-like quality. They remind me strongly of Vallejo metal color. Because they're so fluid and the pigments tend to settle into recesses, you need 3 to 4 coats with a brush despite the high covering power. The finish is quite interesting. The reflectivity is very high, noticeably higher than many other aluminium pigment metallics. But the rough texture from the Ultracryl primer gives the finish a very grainy appearance. I also tested the metallics on a Stahly test model primed with a smooth coat of black spray primer. The result looks much better. Even though the particles are very fine, there's still a slight graininess, but in return the Ultracryl metallics reach the gloss and reflectivity level of lacquer-based metallic paints. As a side note, from what I understand, the Xenexo pigments are also used in the extra premium pure metallics from P3's second wave. I have a comparison with the P3 prototypes here. As you can see, the colors are virtually identical. The P3 metallics do have more body and are easier to work with on the brush though. Given the thin consistency of the Ultracryl metallics, I would actually recommend them more for airbrushing. Speaking of recommendations, are the Ultracryl paints worth recommending at this point, despite my fair share of criticism? Here's my verdict. As you've probably gathered over the course of this video, this review really wasn't easy for me. In defense of Ultracryl, they have ultra premium pigments that you'd normally only find in artist grade acrylics with ultra high opacity even for tricky colors like white and yellow, combined with a fluid consistency that's unlike anything else on the market. The paints are ultra matte, which does unfortunately give them a chalky finish, and many colors tend to leave a clumpy texture, especially the yellows. You also need to watch out for bubbles. The polyurethane hybrid binder just doesn't seem fully dialed in yet, because the paint really fails at feathering and glazing, where the pigments smear and/or leave coffee staining rings. The fluorescent paints in my Kickstarter delivery were so separated and clumped that they're essentially unusable. The metallics are quite interesting thanks to their ultra-reflective pigments, but the consistency makes them difficult to use with a brush, so I'd always reach for Vallejo True Metallic Metal instead. I'd put the metallics at around a 7, but overall I can't give Ultracryl more than a 4 out of 10 right now. I believe there is genuine greatness hiding inside this range. The pigment quality is clearly exceptional and the covering power is brilliant. But the usability just isn't there yet. You might be wondering now why other YouTubers have praised Ultracryl so highly. Honestly, so am I. I'm not accusing anyone of being dishonest. My theory is that since those videos were made 2 or 3 years ago at the start of the Kickstarter campaign, something changed between the prototypes and the final production run. It's a real shame, but I hope that the team at 1001 Labs take the feedback on board and keep improving their paints. So if my assessment changes, I'll update the pinned comment and do a follow-up video. And if you're now looking for an alternative to Ultracryl, make sure to check out my Pro Acryl video here. Pro Acryl also offers a compact palette with no-nonsense paint names and artist-grade pigments with high covering power. Thanks a lot and happy hobbying!